What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Modern video, and today we're going to be taking a look at Temur Rhinos for Modern. Of course, this deck for two reasons. One, it's actually been a while since I've went over this deck. I think it was like June was the last video I uploaded, and when I uploaded that video it was kind of on the downswing, even though the deck was actually pretty good for the format, and obviously it has now seen an uptick in usage. I think according to MTG Goldfish, of course, where I look at all these decks, it is fourth currently in total metagame share. So today feels like any good a day to actually go over the deck and maybe just see exactly why it's starting to see an uptick in usage. So, of course, before I get into any of that, if you have not already subscribed to the channel, please consider tossing me your subscription. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, ring the notification bell so you know when I post modern videos, pioneer videos, other older discussion videos. I actually just posted a video on Friday, this past Friday, going over a deck that you can't even really play in the modern format, and just kind of shows you the rise and fall of how some of these decks kind of interchange out, sort of kind of like Team of Rhinos, only instead the Hollow One deck kind of took a lot harder of a fall than some of our other decks that maybe we're used to seeing in 2022 and 2023. So that's something to look out for. Also, in the description of this video, there is two links. One of them goes to my Twitch channel, which I'm trying to stream on at least once or twice a week, if not more. Just doing other stuff, maybe playing Magic, maybe playing more like video games and stuff like that, just because that's like another big hobby that I'm into. So if any of that interests you, go ahead and follow me over on Twitch. And there's a link in the description to the Discord server as well. Go ahead, join over there, ask me questions about Magic, talk about Magic, just any of that kind of stuff. I made a whole YouTube channel out of it, and even part of my Twitch channel, so why not do it in Discord as well? With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at Team of Rhinos. For those of you that may not be in the loop of what Team of Rhinos actually does, there's this card called Crashing Footfalls. It has no mana cost. It is an undefined mana cost. Its converted mana cost is 0, but it's undefined. The reason why that's important is because cards that like give it flashback, you wouldn't actually be able to cast Crashing Footfalls because it doesn't have a mana cost. It specifically doesn't have a 0 on its cost for a reason. That's why it has that little stamp next to like the sorcery. I won't be able to put my cursor over it, but a little stamp to indicate that the card is green, even though, just how magic rules and stuff works, and that maybe that can be a video for another day. But essentially, Crashing Footballs is a sorcery with an undefined mana cost that you can pay green to suspend for. Suspend allows you to exile the card from your hand and then paying whatever cost to exile it with time counters, in this case 4 time counters, and at the beginning of your upkeep you remove a time counter. When the last one is removed, you cast it without paying its mana cost. The reason why that's important is because some suspend cards do actually have a mana cost. So usually the actual mana cost is more expensive than the suspend cost. So, you could cast it for its suspend cost and, just have to wait so many turns and pay like a cheaper cost, or you end up paying full price and getting whatever effect, earlier. You know. But whatever, that was like a long-winded expression just to kind of explain these undefined mana cost suspend cards. Essentially, Crashing Footfalls makes two 4/4 green Rhino tokens with trample. Now, making two Rhinos on turn 4 is too slow for Modern. We all know this. We know that people are putting, Archon of Cruelties into play. They're playing 2 mana 8/8s, and playing Ragavans and stuff like that. So how does this deck beat all of that? In what way is this deck actually set up to beat those decks? So Crashing Footfalls gets cheated into play through essentially two main spells. You have Violent Outburst, which is essentially an instant speedway. Does have some corner cases where like you can go wide with some of your other creatures that are in your deck, plus some of the other Rhinos. Your Rhinos do get trample, so just giving it like 1 point of power can be the difference of hitting lethal, and of course putting more bodies into play. You also have Shardless Agent, which is just a 3 mana 2/2 with Cascade, that being the important bit. And since our Cascade spells are converted mana cost 3, we cannot play anything that costs 2 or less in our deck other than Crashing Footfalls. So this deck actually builds around that restriction, and it has some pretty interesting ways of getting around it as far as like magic rules and stuff are concerned. So For creatures, you have Brazen Borrower, which is an adventure card where you can pay 2 mana, return target non-land permanent and opponent controls to its owner's hand, and of course you can cast it for 3 mana on, to as a 3/1 flyer with flash. This is very good. While it's probably weaker against obviously some of the more interactive decks, this deck does, or Brazen Borrow gives you a little bit of interaction for the 4 color creativity decks, some of the other Rhino decks and things like that, where you can basically put a card that they do not want in their hand, or a Rhino in this case, into their hand. The Rhino will disappear, whatever, and then you end up getting a threat later to spend your mana. And this deck does a very good job of getting to leave up mana, so it's not necessarily set in stone. Like, okay, like you petty theft my thing, now you're gonna go Brazen Borrow me. You have all these other options with some of your other 3 mana spells, but Brazen Borrower getting to be flexible and get around the 2 or less cost restriction we have essentially placed on ourselves by just having a technical converted mana cost of 3. You go down to Seasoned Pyromancer, which will get to loot. Essentially, it'll enter, you discard 2 cards, and then you draw 2 cards, and it makes 1/1s for each non-land card discarded this way. You can pay 5 and exile the Pyromancer from your graveyard to make 2/1s. Seasoned Pyromancer, even though if you have like 0 cards in hand, like if you just draw this and it's your only card, even though you will not get to make the 1/1s, the drawing is not contingent on how many cards you discard, since you have to discard 2 cards. So if you don't have any cards to discard, you just won't make any 1/1s, but you'll get to draw 2 cards, which is really neat. Obviously, the same for 1 card. If it's a land, or it's land, you don't make a token. If it's a non-land, you make one, and then you draw 2 cards, which is nice. And it does have a little bit of like, flexibility of just getting to make 2/1/1s. Of course, this can like kind of help you stall out, so you find another cascade piece. This can help you dig for a cascade piece, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Blocks pretty decently, I would say, for like the format. Large, obviously, it's not beating most of the stuff like in the top decks, but the fact that it does kind of act as a little annoying way to get in the way of your opponent's stuff, and then also obviously getting to dig towards like your combo is awesome. Finally, the last creature is Fury. That's just a very good card. There's a good mix of like red spells in the deck, and Fury just getting to deal with a Ragavan early, or with a uh, Dragon Rage Channeler and things like that. Just getting to pick off some of the smaller stuff. Hammer being a big deck, for Fury might, I would think, was probably a must at this point, just to be able to deal with all the threats that are in the format that come down in like the early turns. Going into the spells, you have 4 Force Negation. Essentially, this is a way that you can like tap out for a Violent Outburst on your opponent's turn, and then be able to fight back and put some Rhinos into play. Just getting to leave this up and like counter a spell and like just straight up exile it is pretty nice too. This definitely gives you some defense against like some discard spells as well. Obviously, Grief is not going to be a good one, but like the Thoughtseize decks and stuff like that, they're gonna have a hard time dealing with you, especially when you're willing to 2-for-1 yourself to stop from getting your combo taken away from you. You have Dead Gone, Fire Ice, that both spells that you know obviously fire and ice and dead halves of these cards are underneath that restriction. They cost 2 or less. But since split cards are considered different, where the mana cost of both halves of the card is the total mana value of the card. So Dead Gone is technically a 4 CMC spell, and Fire Ice is also a 4 CMC spell. But they get to interact with your opponent in a way so that in the early turns you're not, just hoping that your opponent doesn't get a ton of value on like the second and third turn of the game, to where like your Rhinos aren't gonna be able to take over. So Dead obviously deals with some of the earlier creatures like Ragavan, Dragon Rage Channeler, the small creatures that come from the Hammer deck, so on and so forth. Even getting to deal with some of the tokens from the creativity deck that they can make. Also, Gone, just getting to return a creature that you don't control to its owner's hand. Just some interaction and stuff, things you can do, both in instant speed. Great card. Fire Ice, getting to do 2 different things. Fire, like Ice, can take your opponent off of a spell, tap target permanent, draw a card. So you could just tap one of your opponent's lands. They don't have anything to do with it. You essentially get to time walk them in a way and get to draw a card for your troubles. Fire, getting to deal 2 damage divided as you choose among any 1 or 2 targets, has the possibility of picking off 2 creatures, and obviously a 2 for 1 is always good. You know, also just getting to kill a Ragavan with this is pretty close to, a not 2 for 1 that you can get to as a 2 for 1, if that makes sense. Now, to become immense in the deck, this is something new. I'm assuming whatever Grand Open qualifier in Trieste that this player played in, I'm assuming must be like European or something like that. Pardon me if I get that wrong, but usually the deck list that we see from like Moto top eights and the top eights from like the challenges, top 16s, whatever. Also like 5-0s and stuff like that in leagues differ. My guess is with like Become Immense, obviously like in conjunction with like Fury, if you're able to hit your opponent, that's 18 damage, probably good enough to kill your opponent. Also, just getting to when you make your 4/4 Rhinos, this makes it a 10 power Rhino. Just could really just kill your opponent. That's 14 damage coming across. Or if you have a Shardless Sage at 16. So, uh, while there's probably other cards that you could play in the slot, Become Immense is actually interesting in what you can do with it, and just being like a giant pump spell to kind of get your opponent. You can being a good defensive option along with being pretty offensive as well. Definitely leaning more towards the heavier offense because you would probably play something like Blossoming Defense, just as a way to like get a small pump to your creature, but then mainly protect it, or even the safekeeping spell that's like $1 million for a common. Tameo safekeeping, that's what it is. Mana base, you have Fiery Islets. Obviously, pay 1, sacrifice, draw a card. Mana fixes. Uh, kind of stops you from flooding out in a way because you can just cash in your lands later for actual cards. You have a Besiju to be able to deal with some of the annoying artifact, enchantment, or non-basic lands. Pretty good against, the Titan decks. People are trying to put Dryad into play and Valakut you and things like that. Just to name like one deck. The interesting land and probably the most interesting card in the deck is Gemstone Caverns. Aside from the Become Immense, because the Become Immense is just super weird and not anything that I've ever seen and whatnot. But Gemstone Caverns is a card that like has been played in the deck, and it's just a weird card. Basically, if it's in your opening hand and you are not the player playing first, you can put it into play with a luck counter on it, and you just remove a card from your hand. It adds 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, but if it has a luck counter on it, it adds 1 mana of any color instead. And this is kind of a way where you can get yourself like on the play. So if you like keep 7, this is in your hand. You go down to 5 cards, but you end up with this, and you get to draw up to 6 cards. I mean, you essentially like get that card back that you exiled, and you'll be playing your second land. You're gonna be able to keep your opponent on 1 mana if you ice their land, and then obviously they play a land, say go, they only have 1 mana up, you're able to just like go for a shardless against most decks, like just go for a shardless agent super early. Probably explains why a lot of the decks are playing like spell pierce and stuff as like part of the disruption over counterspell. For this reason that like you could just get Gemstone Cavern and then iced, boom. Here you are facing down like 10 power, and you finally just got like you know all of your mana that's available to you on a given turn by turn 3. Um, Keep going, like you have Otawara. This is pretty basic and pretty standard for a lot of the other decks. Just gets rid of almost any problem permanent. Return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. We don't have any legendary creatures, so this really doesn't matter. And then you have your basic, like you have your shock lands, you have your all your fetch land package and stuff like that. 1 Ketria Triome. I'm assuming just this is something you fetch up on turn 1, gets all your colors, goes and gets a card for you later, when you need it. The sideboard, of course, you still have to follow the restriction, or else your deck just gets vastly less consistent. So just a super basic sideboard plan. Force of Vigor, best 2 for 2 you're gonna get in the format. In terms of like artifacts or newer enchantments, probably just one of the best cards. Period. You're probably like light on like some of the green cards because you only play like 10 in the main deck, and then you have these in the sideboard. But still very good, very powerful, and worth playing as well. Mystical Dispute is a 3 mana counterspell, sure, but you're probably bringing this in just against like the blue decks because it's going to cost 1 when you cast it. It costs 2 less to cast if it targets a blue spell. So just getting around, the cost reduction by, you know, this card being more expensive, but coming at a reduced cost to do what you want it to do. Endurance, people are playing a lot of these like Jeskai Breach decks or just Breach in general. So Endurance, pretty good hedge, 4 of in the sideboard to just kind of get them, really get them when they try to like go off. You just exile their graveyard with the Breach on the stack, flip, tuck it all back in, and then their breach does absolutely nothing, and they're back to trying to refill their graveyard to make those future breaches that much better. And of course, you're putting tons of pressure on them with these rhinos that you're putting into play. 3 Blood Moon, even though we have tons of fetch lands, we have many different basics, or excuse me, many different like dual lands, tri lands, blah blah, etc. Blood Moon is a card that I think gets played less and less, but I think technically gets better as like more non-basics enter the format and just make mana bases more consistent, makes mana fixing better, so on and so forth. Blood Moon can just straight up win you a game. Like you are able to play around it because you know it's coming. Uh, Sometimes you got to be careful about like tipping it off to your opponent because they can fetch in a certain way. And even then, like if they try to play around with your Blood Moon, then they end up not necessarily getting hurt by your Blood Moon, but getting hurt by Blood Moon because then maybe they don't have like double red for their pyromancers or the correct mana that they need. And if you have Blood Moon and you do it and they basically play without fear, kind of like I do, then there's a chance that they end up just losing the game because you played around it, you're able to enact your game plan. They couldn't play around it. They're hoping they draw their basics, and it's just a complete mess. So yeah, that's Team of Rhinos for Modern. The deck is definitely seeing a resurgence. It's seeing more of a metagame share than it normally has. It's been one of those decks that I think is good in the format, kind of like Yawgmoth, but doesn't really, I think, get the respect that it deserves because it is a deck that can punk you out. Like it's does something super powerful. While it's not doing the most powerful thing in the format, it is doing something that is hard for the fair decks to beat, reliably beat, and also just fast enough to put pressure on some of the combo decks, and also can be disrupting enough to actually deal with what is going on in the format. Since a lot of the time that the hammer decks, the creativity decks want to go for like their combo on their turn, and force negation just allows you to tap out to put 10 power into play, and then stop them from doing creativity stuff or stop them from putting a hammer or cigar disease in play and then going right back and just hitting them for 10, hitting them for 12, so on and so forth, and really just putting them in a spot where, like, okay, you need another one, and even if you have another one, if I have a force negation, you're not going to be able to get anything through. So, yeah, that's going to do it for me this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Of course, if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel, leave a like on the video, and ring the notification bell so you know when I post videos like this. If you want to see me play this deck, in a series of matches, so on and so forth, go ahead and comment in the comment section of this video to let me know if you want to see gameplay of this deck. I would be interested in, trying to learn the deck a little bit more from like the player side of it rather than just play testing and metagame for it and stuff like that. So if you want to see that, please leave a comment in the comment section below letting me know. And that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.